Nicolas Cage as a serial killer, it just makes sense. Longlegs. FBI agent Lee Harker is a gifted new recruit assigned to the unsolved case of the elusive serial killer known as Longlegs. As the case takes complex turns, unearthing evidence of the occult, Harker discovers a deeper connection to the case and must race against time to stop him before he claims the lives of another innocent family.
A letter was left with the bodies. Signed with one word.
Written and directed by Osgood Perkins, who's actually the son of Anthony Perkins, who was the star of Psycho. He did a version of Hansel and Gretel that was like okay at best. This movie is a huge leap up for him in skill, craftsmanship, and storytelling. I'm not like the biggest horror fan. I've slowly become a horror fan. Now, would I say, like, is it my favorite genre? Absolutely not.
And I don't think you're gonna like it.
And the horror genre is a hard genre to nail down. It's kind of like comedy. It's very subjective to each person. Some people might think this movie is super scary. Some people don't. I could see this movie being divisive between audience members and critics. I could see people really loving this movie and claiming it as a masterpiece.
It's brilliant, 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 I tell you.
And then I could see some people thinking that this is total trash and not scary at all. I think for me, I'm kind of standing right in the middle of the train track when it comes to this movie. A big portion of this film I do respect and admire. I think is quite creepy and is a very thrilling, well choreographed horror movie. And I say horror very loosely because it's actually more of like a FBI procedural crime thriller. There's maybe only like one jump scare in this movie that like freaked me out. The rest of it is more atmospheric. This movie is so good at building the tone and atmosphere, like even just down to the design. Like the neighborhoods are like clean, empty. There's no people, there's no color, there's no cars on the road. It's just very off-putting. And I think that's the best way I can describe this movie, is that it's off-putting. There's just something always wrong in every shot that this movie shows. A part of that is the acting as well. Like the performances are strange. They're very good and they're really awesome performances, don't get me wrong. Even the amazing actress Maika Monroe, who's really become a horror genre star of her generation, even her performance in this movie is a bit strange. Yes, a part of that is the character that they're building in a way that it serves the overall atmospheric tone of the story. I feel like the character's constantly being watched. I feel like we're constantly being watched while watching this film. And the movie does that very specifically for a reason and very effectively.
Silent, but deadly.
And if you're a horror genre fan and you're gonna go into this movie and you're not too strung up about the details, even though that's a bit ironic because it's an FBI procedural movie, but if you're not getting too caught up on the details and you're just going to this film to see the vibe and to feel the vibe, the tone and the atmosphere, I really do think you're going to love this movie. This is definitely a movie that horror fans will probably latch on to. It kind of has the same buzz and feel like Hereditary, It Follows, which also starred Maika Monroe, and it kind of has that sort of buzz around this film where it does feel like an independent film, yet it somehow is broken really into the mainstream mindset. And it's not just going to be horror fans that go and see this movie. A big part of that is Nicolas Cage, and I'll talk about his performance in a minute. But like I said, if you're a horror genre fan and you're here just for like the ride and feel the thrills, you're going to enjoy it. If you're someone who has the mindset of like, you need to figure out all the pieces, put the pieces of the puzzle together, and to make sure that everything in this movie fits, and you're looking at this movie a bit more logically, I could see how people might be upset with this film as well. I felt that the first 2/3 of this film is a lot better than the last like half hour of this film. Nicolas Cage's performance as Longlegs is very creepy. It's actually almost comedic at points because it is over the top and off-putting, yet it is so terrifying that you're laughing, but you're not like, nice. You're more like, ha, ha, ha. And he just makes you feel so unsettled this whole movie. The way that he looks and moves in this movie, he's almost unrecognizable. Like, I couldn't even tell it was Nicolas Cage. I thought he had a transformative performance. Osgood Perkins did such a great job of penning the script, creating great, interesting dialogue, having some really interesting twists and turns in this movie that mostly work, and I was like, holy crap. And that's also something that this movie does very well, is that it's not the traditional serial killer FBI procedural movie. It does turn things on its head. When you think it's going to go this way, it kind of goes that way. And I like that. I mean, that's what good horror movies are supposed to do. The other two performances of Blair Underwood and Alicia Witt were also phenomenal. Like, they actually carry a lot of this movie on their shoulders as well. It's not just Maika Monroe and Nicolas Cage, especially Alicia Witt. I didn't know she had this in her. Like, she's always been a very good actor. I didn't know she could do this kind of role, and she is phenomenal in this movie. In fact, a lot of this movie relies on her. I mentioned already that this movie isn't necessarily scary. It's more creepy and freaky than it is like a scary film. And I don't like that the marketing for this movie, everyone's like, it's the scariest serial killer film in over a decade, and it's one of the scariest movies ever since Silence of the Lambs. And I think that's a little bit of an overhype, I have to be honest.
So overrated.
This movie definitely pulls from a lot of great horror films like The Shining, Seven, Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, Zodiac, even the first season of True Detective. And it has all these different homages and things that the movie is paying respects to, but it's also not like copying them. It's still telling an original story in its own way. And I think what he borrows and takes from those other movies is great. However, the things that he does borrow and take from those movies, he doesn't do as well as those original films. Like, it's not a better FBI procedural, movie like Silence of the Lambs is. It's not as good of a tone-setting movie like Seven is. The shots in this film really love to linger, and like, you're constantly looking behind Maika Monroe's shoulders. And that sort of technique of lingering shots is all really from The Shining with Stanley Kubrick. This movie plays with realism and evil with the occult and kind of mixes a little bit of all that. Well, they do the same thing in True Detective, but I felt like True Detective, again, does it just a little bit more successfully than this film. So this movie feels like it wants to be, up there in the ranking of all these other great movies and TV shows about serial killers and horror genre, but it doesn't quite reach those heights. I already mentioned that the first 2/3 of this film I think are fantastic, and then there's about another 20-25 minutes of this film afterwards, and it just didn't seem to mesh and gel as well with the first 2/3 of the movie. And I'm gonna do some spoilers here, so spoiler warning for anyone who doesn't want to know anything more about this film. Osgood Perkins didn't fully want to dive into the world of the supernatural, yet wanted to have the supernatural there as an out, as a way to have a plot twist in a film. And I just don't know if it fully worked. Things are hinted at, but you don't really actually ever get to see or experience any of the quote-unquote occult supernatural things until the movie's well half over by that point. And it feels a little bit out of left field, and it doesn't quite work and mesh together with the realism sort of tone and take that this film is ultimately having. So I felt ultimately like this movie relied a little bit too heavily on the supernatural, especially in that back, third of the film, the last 20-25 minutes. I like the idea of it, and if they had used the supernatural idea more so throughout the rest of the film, I don't think it would feel so out of, left field. I would not watch this film again. Like, this is kind of like a one and done. Where movies like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, first season of True Detective, even though I know what happens in those films, and there are some amazing twists in those movies, I can go back and rewatch them, and I still have a good time. It's still entertaining. This movie is not out to entertain. It's meant to make you feel disturbed and uncomfortable. And there are some really brutal kills and deaths and things that happen in this film that are disturbing, and they stay with you for a long time and are things of nightmares, don't get me wrong. But I still think there's a point of like, you want to tell an entertaining story, even if it is dark, depressing, and moody. And I think those other serial killer films, they just exercise and execute that bit better than what Longlegs ultimately does. Not that I'm saying Longlegs is a bad film, because I really enjoyed this movie. I thought this was one of the better horror films of this year. I don't know if this is necessarily like the best horror film of the last like 10, 15 years, but I have to say Longlegs does put up a really great fight and is a thoroughly thrilling serial killer horror film. So before I get my final thoughts on this film, if you like this video, please make sure you click that like button and subscribe to my channel for more content. Also, don't forget to comment down below, what did you think of this horror film, Longlegs? Is this one of your favorite horror films of the year? Do you have any horror movie recommendations for me? Let me know with your thoughts and comments down below. I would love to see those. Thank you so much for doing that. I think it's very good, though I wouldn't claim it as an absolute horror masterpiece. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Longlegs an A-. Thank you so much for checking out Mr. Teach Film Preach. Come back and check out some other reviews such as Hitman and Maxine. Stay focused, stay awesome, and as always, let's get taught.